Hey guys, welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Sam Basher here with yet another MCU Rewatch breakdown, here with the final chapter of MCU Phase 2, Ant-Man. So here's your spoiler warning for Ant-Man the movie, all the Ant-Man comics and the Avengers comics and the Avengers movies. Guys, you know the drill. Let's get going with comic book Easter eggs, my favorite. Now kicking it off with Ant-Man, the name of the movie, and our main hero for this flick. He first appeared in Tales to Astonish number 27 in January 1962, but originally it was Hank Pym, not Scott Lang, which you guys can kind of tell based on the history inside of this movie in the MCU. Now originally Hank is a scientist who created the Pym particle, which is basically the same as it is in the MCU. It's a size-changing formula, basically, but Hank did take on a few different personas in the Marvel Universe. Ant-Man, Giant Man, Yellowjacket, yes, Yellowjacket was a hero sometimes, Goliath, and even Wasp. Yes, Wasp, the same character that his wife, took that persona of. It was strange. He went through a lot. Hank is also well known in the comics for creating Ultron, the villain of the second Avengers film. Now in the movie, they kind of touch on the darker side of Hank Pym. He's not always the most mentally stable guy. In the comics, he's infamously known for hitting his wife, which actually, when that comic was written, there was actually a miscommunication between the artist and the writer. That wasn't really supposed to happen. That was supposed to be just a push, but it turned into a slap. No, it's not great. I'm not a fan of it, and that actually leads to the reason that Scott is the main Ant-Man in the MCU. I'm a fan of that. Also, Scott has a more interesting backstory in my opinion, but it's worth bringing up. Also, it's worth mentioning that he was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, which we actually get a fun nod to Jack Kirby later on in this movie. Also worth mentioning that he and his wife Janet, the Ant-Man and the Wasp, were founding members of the Avengers, not Hawkeye and Black Widow. Now in this intro scene, we see a de-aged Michael Douglas. He looks great. This technology is amazing. Also, we see a couple other MCU characters, which we'll mention later on in our MCU Easter egg section, but let's mention Mitchell Carson, one of our villains for the movie. Wow, he is such a douche. But originally, he appeared in Marvel Team Up Volume 3, number 21 in August of 2006, and he was supposed to be the third official Ant-Man, but then he ended up getting blasted in the face. He gets a big scar on his face, and then Eric O'Grady takes the Ant-Man suit and becomes the pervy Ant-Man. I am not a fan of Eric O'Grady. He watches women in the shower. We're then introduced to Scott Lang, who first appeared in Avengers number 181 in March of 1979. Now in the comics, it's pretty similar to the MCU. He's a thief, he's an electronics expert, and he steals a suit from Hank Pym to use to try to save his sick daughter. Now that's where the stories differ just a little bit from the comic and the movie. But moving on, let's talk about San Quentin Prison, which is a real prison, but also worth mentioning that in the Ultimate Universe, the Punisher spends some time there after accidentally killing Spider-Man, Peter Parker. It's a dark story. Also, let's give a shout out to Michael Pena, who plays Luis in this movie. He is amazing. Also, I'm a big fan of the other crooks that work with Ant-Man and Luis, even though they are kind of stereotypes. But they also are original creations for this movie. They have no, origins from the comics. But what's not original is Darren Cross. He first appeared in Marvel Premiere number 47 in April 1979. Now, he is way over the top, and they do try to explain it because the faux Pym particles are kind of messing with his brain chemistry, but this movie doesn't really dive into that at all. We also get a nod to that with Hank saying that he can't use a suit anymore because it affected his brain chemistry. That's actually why in the comics it's explained why he hit his wife. Moving on, we do see Hope Van Dyne, who is in the comics, but it's kind of complicated. Her appearance is in A-Next number 7 in April 1999, so relatively new. Now originally, she was created in an alternate reality. She is the daughter of Hank and Janet, but she actually grows up to become a villain, aka the Red Queen. But moving on from that, we see the Yellowjacket armor, which first appeared on Hank Pym in Avengers number 59 in December of 1968. Now the powers are very similar to the Ant-Man suit, and the Yellowjacket suit in the comics is pretty much the same in the movie, but I feel like this is actually a fun connection to Eric O'Grady, and that's why Carson kind of plays a role in this. Now bear with me, but originally Eric O'Grady's costume has arms, similar to the Iron Spider suit, and the Yellowjacket costume in this has the little arms that have the stingers on it, which there are stingers on the Yellowjacket costume in the comics. We then run into Cassie Lang, Scott's daughter, who is from the comics, and she's actually a very prominent hero. Now, she first appeared in Marvel Premiere number 47 in April 1979, and she does take on a number of different personas, specifically Ant Girl, Giant Girl, Stinger, and Stature. Moving forward, we get our MCU Ant-Man suit, which I actually prefer to the comic accurate suit. Also, shout out to the first time Scott shrinks in the bathtub. I do want to point out that shrinking in a bathtub bathtub, or mainly a sink, and then getting washed down the drain and running into a rat is one of Ant-Man's first adventures when he shrinks. Also, we run into one of the flying ants, and Scott Lang gets on top of it, which is Ant-Man's famous mode of transportation in the comics. He's done it in the past, he does it present, it's awesome. Also, we get a few nods to subatomic or the quantum realm, which is usually called the microverse in the comics.
If that regulator is compromised, you would go subatomic.
What does that mean?
It means that you would enter a quantum realm.
I kind of hope they call it the microverse in the Ant-Man and the Wasp movie, but it is cool that they mentioned it. It's just a universe that exists once you shrink down far enough. There's even people there and other alien races. Very fun. Also, I think we get a nod to Hope being a villain in the comics with this scene right here where she's testing out the ant control module on her ear. And this leads us to the Wasp explanation. Where is Janet? Now, here's a quick backstory on her. She first appeared in Tales to Astonish number 44, and she's a founding member of the Avengers. Now, she is similar to Hank, being that she can shrink, but she is different where she has wings and blasters, which seems like the smart thing to do. Ant-Man, come on. You ride a flying ant, put some wings on yourself. It'll help you get around. Then moving forward to the Falcon Ant-Man fight, it's really cool that we actually get to see the red goggles from Falcon's costume that are in the comics. And then scooting forward, we don't really get any more comic book Easter eggs until the first post-credit scene with the Wasp's costume. It's very cool that we get some hues of yellow there, which we don't see now in the Ant-Man and the Wasp costume. It's more gray, but you do get some of the signature yellow that is part of Wasp's costume in the comics. That's enough for comic book Easter eggs. Let's move on to MCU, please. Kicking it off with the opening to the movie, we see the Triskelion being built, which we first saw in Captain America Winter Soldier, which is from the comics. It first appeared in the Ultimate Universe. Now it's in the main comic universe as well. We also get to see Peggy Carter, one of my favorite characters in the MCU. Of course, we last saw her in Avengers Age of Ultron in that weird Captain America dreamy thing that he had. But also, let's give a shout out to the Marvel 2.0 logo, which I am a big fan of. Also, if I remember correctly, this is the last time we end up seeing it. But anyways, let's give a shout out to Luis's introduction with this scene.
What's up, man?
So good. And then after Scott gets fired from Baskin-Robbins, if you notice the poster in the background, that's actually a drink company that we saw Bruce Banner working for in his solo Hulk adventure. It's Pingo Dolce. Pingo Dolce. Also later we see Hank's keys, and on that keychain we see the tank, which later on is used in the movie. Don't worry, I'll bring it up. Then moving forward, we see this random guy looking menacing. In a deleted scene, we actually see that he has a 10 rings tattoo on his neck. 10 Rings is the villainous terrorist organization that we saw in the Iron Man franchise. Very cool that there's a nod to them in this movie, or there was going to be, but deleted scene. I did want to point out during Scott's first shrinking scene, he shrinks from the middle of his body instead of shrinking down, which he normally does throughout the rest of the movie. Then moving forward to his jailhouse breakout scene on the flying ant for the very first time. If you notice this newspaper this random person is holding, it says Sokovia right there, which is a fun nod to Avengers Age of Ultron, them dropping a city. There's also another nod to Avengers Age of Ultron, but later on. Then scooting forward to Hank and Scott talking about Ant-Man and what he's done with the Ant-Man suit and him wanting Scott to be the new Ant-Man. If you notice in the background, you actually see a breakdown of the Ant-Man helmet on the wall. Also, we get a shout out to the Avengers right here.
I think our first move should be calling the Avengers.
And that's where you get your other Age of Ultron nod. Then moving forward to one of our final confrontation scenes, we get a nod to Hydra.
The representatives of Hydra. They're not what they were. They're doing some interesting work.
This could actually be a fun nod to the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show, because after the events of Winter Soldier, they went on the offensive against Hydra as well. Also want to point out here, Carson is running away with a sample of the fake Pym particles. Maybe this is a hint to Ghost, our villain in Ant-Man and the Wasp, because if you notice during this scene, there's kind of a yellowish hue to Ghost as she's kind of phasing a little bit. Also, the tank on the keychain scene does pay off here at the end, but I don't think a tank could survive a fall like that. And then I gotta point out the final nod to Empire Strikes Back during phase 2 of the MCU. The first body part that Darren Cross ends up losing when he starts shrinking in on himself is his arm, which is a nod to Luke losing his arm in Empire Strikes Back. This has happened in every single phase 2 MCU movie if you watch all my other breakdowns. But I did want to point out during the shrinking scene where Scott is going subatomic, there's a few random flashes of a figure which has later been confirmed to be the Wasp because it cuts between Scott's mask and then her figure and some wings. But anyways, let's skip to the final tip scene from Luis, and there's a bunch of fun Easter eggs in this scene as well. But we do hear a reference to a guy that jumps, a guy that swings, a guy that crawls up walls.
We got a guy who jumps, we got a guy who swings, we got a guy who crawls up the walls. You gotta be more specific.
Which feels like an obvious nod to Spider-Man, but the creative team behind this movie said that this script was written way before Spider-Man was going to be a part of the MCU, but hey, who else is it gonna be? Also worth mentioning that the second post-credit scene that we get is actually a scene from Captain America Civil War, and it was directed by the Russo brothers, and they even mentioned the Sokovia Accords.
Who knows if the Accords will let them help?
But this is a a very fun Easter egg that confirmed that Ant-Man was going to pop up in that movie, and he's amazing in it. I can't wait to talk about it. But anyways, enough of that. Let's do some pop culture references really quick. First up, during the Baskin-Robbins scene, if you notice, Paul Rudd's name tag says Jack, which feels like a nod to Jack Kirby, one of the co-creators of the Ant-Man character. Also, a shout out to two amazing comedians during this Baskin-Robbins scene. The guy asking for a hot pretzel is Johnny Pemberton, and also Dale, Scott Lang's boss, is Greg Turkington. They are hilarious. But moving forward, we actually get a fun nod to a Marvel creator, someone who worked on the Avengers and a couple Ant-Man stories, Al Milgrom. He is referenced here with the Milgrom Hotel that Scott is staying in. Also, we get a nod to Warren Ellis because the president of this universe is President Ellis. Also worth mentioning that this random guy in a car that Scott Lang falls on top of and then grows, this is actually Garrett Morris, who was on SNL for a stretch, and he played Ant-Man. We also get a fun nod to David Copperfield in this scene right here.
That's like some David Copperfield
as well as the Andy Griffith Show with the whistling joke.
No, don't whistle. No whistling. It's not the Andy Griffith Show.
Also, here's a shout out to Thomas the Tank Engine. It's very cool that the company that owns that IP allowed them to use it in this movie. It was awesome seeing him big. Also worth pointing out, we actually get to see the microorganism, a tardigrade, as Ant-Man is shrinking into the microverse. Also, shout out to YouTuber Anna Akana. She now does more acting as well, but it is very cool to see some representation for YouTube in these movies. And finally, of course, a Stan Lee cameo. He is the bartender during the very final Luis tip scene. It's very cool to see him. I'm glad he was able to make it in this movie. Of course, he's gonna make it in this movie. Whew. Okay, not as bad as Avengers Age of Ultron or Guardians of the Galaxy, but that was still a very fun movie to break down. Which of these Easter eggs were your favorite? Let me know in the comments down below or on Twitter. Let's try @SamBasher this time, huh? That's me. Tweet me your thoughts. Also, if I missed anything, you can let me know. You guys love doing that. It's always a blast. But make sure you like this video, comment down below, share it with all of your MCU pals, and subscribe for more breakdowns. I'm gonna be doing Captain America Civil War next week, but there's also a ton of other Easter egg breakdown things on this channel, like for Westworld or The Walking Dead or Game of Thrones. Again, I'm Sam Basher, and I'll see you next time.